I call John O'Naylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I feel this evening that I'm trapped inside a children's storybook a little bit. From what I've heard from the other side of the House, it feels like the story of Chicken Licken. The sky is falling, the sky is falling. It's doom, it's gloom, nothing good can possibly ever happen. And all we're hearing about is the negative things that perhaps might be going to happen as a result of this bill. Well, Mr. Speaker, I think it's really important that we do put this bill in the context of what it is that this government is trying to achieve for the vulnerable people of New Zealand. And I guess the first point is that the provision of social housing in New Zealand is going to continue. It is something that this government's committed to having happen. We're looking at some different ways that we can perhaps deliver social housing in New Zealand, and I think that's a good thing. We continue to be committed to ensuring that people who need it most will still be getting the assistance that they need through social housing. That is fundamental to any society which is caring and a government that has any level of benevolence. And this government, Mr. Speaker, is no different in that regard. And so the question I guess we need to ask ourselves fundamentally when we're looking at anything to do with social housing is, should the government be in the business of ensuring that those people who are unable to house themselves are housed? And the answer to that question, Mr. Speaker, is unreservedly, yes, we should. Absolutely we should. It is absolutely the business of government to ensure that when people are unable to house themselves, or when perhaps they're not able to afford to do that, that the government provides subsidies on occasion, perhaps that the government provides housing, or that the government perhaps empowers other organisations to provide that housing. And so this government continues to be committed to the idea that the government should be in the business of providing social housing. Does this mean, however, that we need to stick to the same mode of delivery that we have always stuck to? And the question to that, Mr. Speaker, is no, not necessarily. Now, in the 1930s, there was Mr. Savage was the Prime Minister, and he kind of initiated this idea of state housing in New Zealand. And in Palmerston North, we've got Savage Crescent. In fact, it's now a heritage site because it's got some of the state houses that were some of the first in New Zealand constructed in Savage Crescent in Palmerston North. Is it appropriate that they remain there as a heritage site? Yes, it is. It's really important because that was an important part of New Zealand's history. It was an important part of a good idea at the time which delivered a really great outcome for the people of New Zealand. But if I was listening to the members on the other side of the House this evening, I would think that innovation stopped in the 1930s. That Mr. Savage as Prime Minister and his government, when they brought up the idea of state housing, was the last good idea that anybody could possibly ever have about the provision of state housing in New Zealand. And so therefore, we must not tinker, we must not meddle, we must not do anything that could possibly be different to what is happening.
That's right.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm not prepared to just settle on what's been done in the past, because I'm aspirational for the people of New Zealand. I'm ambitious, in fact, even for the people of New Zealand, because I don't want them to simply have just what was always provided before. Because I think, Mr. Speaker, that the people of New Zealand deserve better than us simply resting on what was done close to 100 years ago. I think they deserve us to be thinking about creative ways that we can deliver an even better service to them. And so, Mr. Speaker, we're going down the path of innovation. And this government is absolutely committed to looking at innovative new ways to help people in the area of housing. And I'll touch on the bill a little bit more, but I just again want to get the context right. Remember that this government is also looking to help more people get into their first homes as well. We've introduced the Home Start package, which is helping young people to be able to cash in on their KiwiSaver, to be able to get greater grants from the government to enable them to get into their first homes. we are absolutely committed to wanting to ensure that we reverse the trend of people finding it harder to get into homes. And so we're committed to ensuring that people will be able to get into those first homes. And we're looking forward to seeing what's going to be happening as we've been doing roadshows around the country on the Home Start package. The level of interest from mortgage brokers, from young people who can finally see an opportunity to get into their first house, absolutely getting into it, loving the idea, and we're going to see some great things happening from that. And for those people who are on lower incomes, who've been either rental properties or who are living in their own homes, Mr. Speaker, we've done a whole heap of work over the last few years in warming up those homes, because we believe that people should live in healthy homes. They can live in warm homes. And so the Warm Up New Zealand campaign has been a fantastic success that's seen so many people now living in homes that are warmer, they're drier, and they're living better. But we've got to keep going, Mr. Speaker, because this government isn't just going to sit there and say, well, that's the last good idea that we've had, was Home Start and warming up homes. Unlike the opposite members who want to rest on a 1930s decision and stay there, we're going to keep going, and we're going to keep doing more to deliver better outcomes for New Zealanders. One of the things that's received a bit of criticism, and I won't shy away from it, Mr. Speaker, is the tenancy reviews that have been going on. And some of those reviews have been really, really interesting, because what we've found is that there are a number of people who are currently living in state-owned houses who are actually paying nearly either full rent or nearly full rent. Now, I have to ask myself, what is the point in the government owning houses that people are living in paying full rents? All they are doing is, those are people who could be paying market rents, those are people who perhaps could even be potentially buying their own homes, but are staying in the house that the house provided for them, as was appropriate when they had the need, beyond the point where they have that need. And so, Mr. Speaker, it's appropriate that those people move on from that point and they move into other arrangements that they can afford, so that we can free up those houses for those people who most need it. And it's been really interesting, the moment that those tenancy reviews have been done with a number of people, the first thing they've said is, oh, yes, I guess we could go and look somewhere else. Actually, perhaps we could think about buying, and I think that's a really positive outcome for those people to get out from underneath the feet of the government and start to take control of their own lives and get involved in that way. I think it's really important, again, that we continue to work down this path. It was really interesting, and I've told this story before, but I hope if people have heard it, they won't mind hearing it again. Last year, I spoke to a woman who was living in a 4-bedroom state house. It had been really good for her when her children were young. They'd grown up, they'd moved on. Now, this woman said to me, but don't worry, Jono, those rooms aren't going to waste, because I've got international students living in there. I've got international students who are helping to supplement my income. Now, on one level, I was kind of thinking that was very good, innovative, entrepreneurial thinking on her part. But that said, what I also thought was what she was doing was was stopping some people who perhaps needed that kind of housing. So we are looking at what we're doing with our portfolio. We're wanting to make sure that our portfolio delivers the right kind of housing to the people who need it most, rather than just presuming that the stock of houses that was built in the 1930s for families of the 1930s will meet the need of today. Now, I just want to come back finally to this point about innovation. Currently, we've got over 60,000 New Zealand homes. What we're talking about here is some empowering legislation that would allow the relevant ministers to sell, or actually not just sell. And it's interesting, people have been talking about selling, but if you want to read the explanatory note on the front of the bill, I suggest members opposite do, because in here it states it very clearly: contracts may be for the sale or for the lease of properties. This is not just about sale, it's about having flexibility for us to be innovative. We've got over 60,000 state houses. We're talking about 1,000 or 2,000. That is about 2 or 3% of the current housing stock that we're debating tonight. We're not talking about a radical overhaul. We're not talking about a mass sale-off. What we're talking about is giving the relevant ministers the flexibility to be innovative with a very small proportion of our housing stock, so that we can have a look We can see whether or not these things will deliver better results, and if they do, perhaps we'll do some more. But what we're going to keep doing is we're going to ensure that the people of New Zealand who most need our help will get our help, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, I commend this bill to the House.